Good evening once again. This is International Master Oladapo Adu. And today I actually bring to you one of the games that was played at the Champions Chess Tour in Oslo, Norway. And this is a very, very interesting and exciting game between Grandmaster Alireza and Levon Aronian. Of course, Grandmaster Alireza representing France and Levon Aronian representing the USA. Um, let us get right into it. In this position, in this game, white was Alireza, while the black pieces was Aronian. E4 was played. C5, knight f3, d6. We have the Sicilian defense. What kind of Sicilian defense? We don't know yet. D4, C, D4, knight takes D4, knight f6, knight c3. We have the Nashdorf. The Nashdorf has a very, um, it has a reputation of very being a very aggressive defense. When you play the Nashdorf, you better know the lines. One sleep and the game is pretty much over. So a6 is played. Bishop to d3. This is kind of like an offline in the playing against the Nashdorf. Bishop to d3. So white is not really looking to get any kind of opening advantage. Just trying to position the pieces and see what black responds with. Black goes to e5. Now e5 makes some sense here. Because the idea of the e5 is making sure this bishop on d3 remains a bad bishop thanks to the pawn on e4. But then by moving the pawn to e5, you're giving away the d5 square forever. So white can pretty much build a very strong edifice on the d5 square, and there's really nothing much black can do about that. So after the move e5, knight to e2 is played. White is going to go for something like knight to g3, bishop to g5, captures, maybe knight to h5. The idea is to occupy this d5 square of a piece. And what we want to do is get rid of every piece that's going to stop us from occupying the d5 square. So knight de2 is played, and bishop to e7, castles, bishop to e6. Immediately, black realized the danger of leaving the d5 square unprotected for too long. Hereby bringing the bishop out immediately, even before going for the castle, bishop is going to come out to e6. Probably at some point in time, there's going to be knight bd7, there's going to be knight b6. Everything trying to keep an eye on this very critical d5 square. So f4 is played. Of course, the f4 is a multi-purpose move. I'm trying to push the pawn to f5, trying to chase the bishop out. And if some situations I can easily take on e5, trying to open up the f5 file for the white pieces. So captures back with the knight, putting pressure on the bishop immediately. And of course, still fighting for the very important d5 square. Knight takes f4, knight to c6, bishop to e3. White rushes out to get all his minor pieces in the game as quick as possible. And that's one thing about chess. We talk about this a lot of times. You always want to get all your minor pieces in the game first. That's your bishops and your knights before you actually get to your other major pieces, your rook, queen, and all that stuff. So after the move bishop to e3, um, knight goes to e5. What's the point of knight to e5? Keeping an eye on the g4 square, which is loosely protected by the white pieces because he has just the queen eyeing that square. Meanwhile, black has three pieces. These are things you always have to keep an eye on when you're playing. If I have the white pieces in this position, I'm going to move my king to h1. So that if there's any time there's an attack on the bishop on e3, I'm going to slide the bishop to g1 so that the bishop is safe. Why am I trying to protect my bishop? It's an open position. Semi-open. So it's very important for me to keep the bishop in the game. And of course, the bishop keeps an eye on a lot of squares in black's territory. So a4 is played by Alireza. Alireza said, I don't have time trying to hide my bishop. If you want to go get it, go get it. So a4 is played here. Castles. Queen to e1. What's the point of queen to e1? I think it's very important that every move your opponent makes, you want to try to break it down. Why is the queen e1 played? It's very obvious that the queen is trying to go to the king side. I don't know where exactly to try to create some play on this part of the board. So queen to e1, I'm not so sure of the idea behind queen to e1. So after the move queen to e1, rook to c8. Of course, black starts to create his own play on the c file. And that's a very typical thing for the black pieces. In the Sicilian defense, black is always looking to create some play on the c file. And I think one of the reasons why this might be a good move is because after the rook takes c3, we don't want to capture off the pawn because it's going to really mess up our white's position. So queen takes c3 will be a good idea. So after the move rook to c8, a5. Of course, now with the move a5, we're not really worried about the knight g4 because we can get the tempo on the queen with the move bishop to b6. And of course, by moving the pawn to a5, you're stopping the advance of the b pawn. So this b pawn is going to be a little bit, it's going to be weak for a little while. How long, we really don't know. So let's get back to the game. So knight goes to d7, knight fd7, keeping an eye on the b6 square. After knight fd7, knight to d5, knight c to d5. Looking at white pieces looks kind of, threatening. Knight on d5, knight on f4, even the bishop on d3. Because the bishop over d3 is always going to have a pressure on the h7 square. And if you capture, I think it's going to capture back with the pawn, giving white two beautiful, nice center pawns, which can be mobile at some point. And also then we can always try to relocate the bishop to the square d4, putting pressure on the g7 square. So after the move knight d5, bishop goes to g5. What's the point? There's pressure on the f4 knight. Are we really worried about this knight being captured? Not really. So nothing threatening. For example, even if it takes on d5, we can always stay with the knight. So bishop takes, we can always take the knight as we get the bishop. So there's really nothing we're worried about. Bishop goes to d4. I just mentioned about this move d4 trying to put pressure, not just on the knight, but the g7 square. Knight goes to c5, putting pressure on d3 twice. So now we have to start thinking about what's going to capture after all these pieces attacking each other. And this is some of the things I talked about in the game of chess. Anytime there's a contact between pieces, you have to think about what's going to happen when there are changes based on those contacts. In this position, this is a contact. Knight on d3 is a contact. Knight c on d3. Knight e on d3 is another contact. Bishop to d5 is a contact. Bishop to f4 is a contact. Bishop to d4 is a contact. Knight to e6, all these things are contacts. You always have to ask yourself, what are the possible things that can happen if there are exchanges? And that's why it's very important to always keep the pressure. You want to keep the tension. You don't want to give away a lot for your opponent. So after the move knight to c5, queen goes to g3, still protecting the bishop, putting pressure on on g5, putting pressure on g7. So now at this point, the bishop and the knight has to be careful where they move to, because now we have an extra attack on g7 and there's another one on g7. So bishop goes to h4, attacks the queen. Queen e3, that's about the only move. You don't want to, there is no other squares but to come back to e3. When you start having only moves, it's not a good thing. Bishop goes back to g5. Queen goes to e2. Alireza says, you know what, I'm not going back to g3 to even give you an idea of trying to get a draw. Mr. Aronian, we have to play this game. So he plays queen to e2, bishop goes to h6. I really still don't like, I don't know. I would have just moved this king here, maybe wasting some time, but I would have just moved that king. I don't like the fact this king is kind of exposed. But anyway, b4 is played. Alireza really wants Aronian to make up his mind about the knight on c5. Are you really trying to take on d3 or what? Are you going to go back? What exactly do you want to do? Well, it didn't take long for Alireza to hear what Aronian has to do with the knight. It goes back to d7. It was trying to keep the pressure. And this is one thing we always have to be careful about. If you're going to ease the pressure in a game, that means if you're going to capture a piece, it captures back, know what you're getting for that exchange. Because if you don't get anything, your opponent certainly is going to get something. So knight c d7, h3. Now I like the move h3. So I think it's a multi-purpose move, keeping black away from the g4 square, and also creating a loop so that the king can always get to h2 in case, the king can always get to h2, getting with any kind of checks, either from this diagonal, even though there's none here because of the bishop. So h3 is played. Rook goes to e8. Now we have the rook having an extra attack on the queen. All these things we have to think about it. And immediately we have to ask ourselves questions. What do we do? Do we stay here or we just get away from that pin? Rook f2 is played. What's the point of rook f2? I think a good idea for white is to double the rooks on the f5 and put pressure on f7. But really, there's really nothing much to worry about f7 because f7 is well protected, not just by the bishop, the knight, and also the king is helping in some kind of ways. Although you never really want to rely on your king, protecting the square. If you have a chance of using other pieces, you want to do that. King protecting squares is not always a good idea. So after rook f2, knight goes to c6, attacking the bishop on d4, attacking the knight on attacking the bishop on d4, attacking the pawn on b4. Well, we don't want to have to worry about this right away, but at the same time, you have to think about the possible captures. For example, if bishop takes, knight can take this. That's even if this bishop has moved away. So what do we do here? We move the bishop back. We don't want to have to lose this bishop. Like I said earlier, it's very important to keep the bishops because you don't know what kind of position you're going to have. So bishop goes to b2. Bishop captures, knight takes pawn, wins a pawn. So now black is up a pawn, and I really don't see any danger for black. Black is just up a pawn. Apart from that, he has the two bishops, and I don't think the two bishops can stay in the game for too long because there's always knight takes d3. So knight takes b4, knight takes e6, rook takes e6. That was not a good move by Levon Aronian. Well, what should he have played here? F takes e6 would have been a good move for the black pieces. Excuse me. So rook takes e6, bishop to c4, immediately putting pressure on not just the bishop, not just the rook on e6, but also the pawn on f7. It says pawn push, queen goes to f3, threatening to take on f7. Threatening to take on f7, winning the rook here. So if you take my rook, I'm going to take on f7 and take on e6, and we're just winning a pickup. Well, I'm winning an exchange. So he plays knight to f6. What's the point of knight to f6? Stopping the knight on capturing f7, putting pressure on the pawn on e4. So what does white do here? White takes, pawn takes, attacking the rook. Rook goes to d6. Bishop comes to b3. Now the bishop protects the pawn. The rook protects the pawn. We have the two bishops against the two knights in an open position, advantage white. These are things we always have to watch out for. Two bishops against two knights, open position, advantage white. Let us see how Alireza was able to exploit this advantage. And let us see the material. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. So white has 4 pawns to black's 5 pawns. But I tell you, the bishops are enough compensation for the white pieces. Like I said, let us see how white was able to make something happen from this position. So rook goes to d1, creating a pin on the d file. Knight goes to e7, immediately breaks the pin. Rook captures on d6. Queen captures on d6. Queen takes b7. That's gets his pawn back. Another possibility is to take twice on f6. But like I said, you have the bishop here. There's no point trying to take twice on f6. Queen takes b7. Take that off the board first. And you can always still maintain your bishops. White is having a lot of pressure here. Like I said, there's a bishop on b3 putting pressure. There's a queen on f3. There's a rook on f2. These whites are going to really suffer in the open position because if they don't have pawns to support them, white can be really, really bad. So queen takes b7 is played. Rook goes to b8, attacking the queen. Queen goes to a7, making sure this diagonal is protected. After the move to queen a7, rook goes to e8. What's the point of rook to e8? Defending the back rank is still one of it. Also defending the the knight on e7. So rook goes to f1. Rook f8. Now, rook f8 is very important, especially if you're threatening to move the knight on f6, because you need a protection for the pawn on f7. Queen goes to b6. Makes a lot of sense for white in this position to try to not exchange pieces. Because, like I said, these bishops are still monsters against this knight. And the more open the position gets, the stronger we is with the guy with the bishop. So queen b6 is played. It says knight to c6. I can't afford to trade queens right now. So it plays queen to e3. That was a blunder by Alireza because Alireza could have simply taken the pawn on a6, and now you have two passed pawns can be supported by the bishop, the queen, and the rook. This is just curtains. This game is just pretty much over. But in this position, Alireza came to e3, which was not a good move. By going to e3, you're throwing away a lot of your advantage. Knight takes a5, bishop goes to a3. That's one thing Alireza. Alireza is a very tactical player. He has a very good eye for tactics. If there's any tactical position, any tactical stuff on the board, most time it would definitely see. Most of the time, not all the time, because hey, it's human. Of course, we cannot take on a3 now because of bishop takes f7 wins the queen. So after bishop to a3, rook attacks the queen. Says, you know what? I'm going to attack your queen. You attack my queen, I attack your queen. But there's something I would say Levon missed this, but I think this is just the best move for Levon. To try to get the best out of the position. Queen takes, rook check, knight takes, bishop takes f7 check, king moves, bishop takes on d6, knight takes on d6, bishop to d5, centralizing the bishop, stopping the knight from seeing the light of the day. And after that move, I think Levon said he's had enough, and Levon threw in the towel. Very nice game by Alireza. This is, like I said, this is one of the things we have to realize, the importance of the bishops in an open position. Think about it, this one bishop pretty much paralyzes these two knights. But anyway, having a rook with a bishop in an open position against the two knights, absolutely no chance. No chance at all. All right, thank you for staying here, and check out the game, see what you think about the game, and we'll be back with some more games. See you again soon. This is International Master Oladapo. Take care and God bless. Bye.